Hi, we're here today with the management team for Mannkind, the best known for their inhaled insulin, but also recently you had approval for a bionic eye for a second company. It's called Second Sight. So we have Mr. Al Mann and the CFO for Mannkind, Mr. Matthew Pfeffer. But just for, you may not remember this, but we go way back in the year 2000. I visited you in your office when I was a sell-side analyst, and we were launching coverage on Mannkind.
Yes.
And then the company promptly got acquired after we did all that work. So that was back with Credit Suisse, and so that was interesting. So let's talk first. You've now been involved in several diabetes efforts. Minimed, as I mentioned, which is bought by Medtronic, now Mannkind. How did you get involved with diabetes so much?
Well, really, there was no personal involvement, but I had created my first medical company was Pacesetter Systems. It's now St. Jude Medical, and they created the first long-term cardiac pacemaker, and I was simply trying to diversify the company, and I was looking for other places where we could use the technology, and we decided to develop insulin pumps.
Interesting. And when did you start to work on the Mannkind, the inhaled insulin concept? Was that during the Minimed days or later?
Actually, it was. We had discovered a technology that could stabilize large molecules, and that was in 1998. And in 99, we tried a couple of drugs, and it worked quite well. And then in 99, I wondered whether we could use that to stabilize insulin monomers, single molecules of insulin. All other insulin products today are hexamers, 6 molecules bound together. And the body can't break down that hexamer. It takes time to do that. And so if we could only create a stable form of insulin monomers, that would be much faster, and the problem with current insulins, they're much too slow. And so what we did is we did a trial to look at the kinetics and dynamics of an insulin formed with this technology.
Many years ago, in the Minimed days, and it showed promise, and one led thing to another.
It was fantastic. When I saw the data, I said, "My God, that will transform diabetes." And that's how we got started. And then that was in '99. In 2001, we sold Minimed.
Right.
We sold it to Medtronic, and Medtronic wasn't interested in developing anything that had to do with drugs. They were strictly a device company. And so we spun it off, and that created the pillar of Mannkind.
Okay, very interesting. So before we go on, let's help me understand just briefly in a few seconds what is this prandial problem concept, and because I think that's important to understand before we talk about the inhaled insulin.
Well, what I was trying to say before, the problem with insulins is they start too slowly and they last much too long.
Whereas your native pancreas?
The native pancreas insulin, you get the first peak of insulin in a matter of a few minutes, and it's essentially gone in less than 2.5 to 3 hours.
And so the need for a super rapid acting insulin is not just your goal, but also Biodel and some other companies, right? Where do we stand? Are there any super rapid acting insulins now?
No.
Or is Ifrez is the closest in the FDA process?
Correct.
And so a lot of people, yes, inhaled insulin avoids the needle stick, but your point is that it's really more important that it's rapid acting, correct?
Yes, ultra rapid acting, we say.
Super rapid, okay.
Because they call the insulin analogs that are available today, which are much better than native insulin in a hexamer form, but they call those rapid acting analogs. And so we call ours ultra-rapid or ultra-fast insulins.
Now, when you bring up the topic of inhaled insulin, everyone thinks of Pfizer's Exubera. How is your product different, and what marketing lessons did you learn from Pfizer?
Well, the only really similar characteristic is that they were both powders.
Right.
But beyond that, they were totally different.
Different pharmacokinetics. And you have the device here, so
yes,
why don't you go ahead and show us?
The Pfizer preparation called Exubera
it was about this size.
Oh no, it was that size when they used it.
Yeah.
And about that big around.
Yeah.
It got, when you put it in your pocket, it was about that big. The telescope. But it peaked. It did not even peak as fast as the existing analogs.
All right.
So it was clinically not as good as existing insulins. It was very awkward, very inconvenient, and it was also quite expensive, especially in Europe.
Okay. And aside from that, did they market it aggressively as they should have? Did they not go to the right type of doctor?
Well, they
how
tried
will you,
to.
let's say Exubera is approved tomorrow, how will you market the drug differently than they did?
Well, Exubera.
Excuse me, Afrezza. Excuse me, your Afrezza is approved tomorrow.
Well, we would go obviously to the doctors who were treating people with diabetes. We'd start with the diabetologists and endocrinologists, and then move on to the primary care physicians, because that's where the people are being treated.
All right. Now, your Afrezza had some hiccups a few years ago. Discuss that and what makes you confident it'll get approved this time.
Well, what happened is when we submitted for approval in 2010, the FDA had raised a number of questions about the device we were using to deliver it, the inhalation device. And some of the questions were going to be rather difficult to resolve. Things like they wanted the cartridge labeled as well as, marked as well as the package it was in, and that was going to be difficult on that device. But there were things like that.
So some of the data was conducted on one medical device cartridge,
yes, a lot of data.
And then you switched. The medical device itself changed, and the FDA said, "Well, we need more."
Well, when they asked the question, we had developed a new device which was frankly much better.
Is that it?
And that's this device, and it was so much easier to answer their questions. We thought we would see whether they would accept the refiling with the new device, and they did. And then at the last minute they reversed it, and in January of 2011 they gave us a complete response letter asking for 2 new trials.
So the 2 new trials were started when? 2011 or sooner?
They were probably started sort of before the end of 2011.
Okay, so these are new trials, and we just saw them published in August, or at least the top line data, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so that is what you will then refile with the FDA with. So let's talk about that. They both met their endpoints, correct?
Yes.
But there's a lot of critics out there, and I guess from the legacy of the Pfizer days, there's a lot of naysayers, and I'll just have to bring those up. So, for example, you did a trial looking at type 2 diabetes that was meant to be superior to state-of-the-art, superior to medical therapy, correct?
Yes.
Not insulin. And people are saying, well, it wasn't superior enough in hemoglobin A1C reduction.
It was pretty good.
And what just address that.
It was 8.2% reduction in A1C, which is quite good for the class of people we're talking about.
Okay,
and just to jump in a little bit to correct, the study was not designed to show superiority. That was not the design of the study. It was designed to be what they call non-inferiority.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
And it did meet that endpoint.
Okay, great.
We put in some superiority secondary things, and we hit some of them. We didn't hit others.
No, that's important. Thanks.
But we did hit the primary endpoint, and that's what the FDA asked for.
And what might be some of the reasons the results were a little different? Are there newer type 2 medications out there that are more effective, making the comparator harder? What might be some of the...
No, not really.
Yeah.
Actually, I think the results were quite good.
Okay. Now, the type 1 study, the one in the type 1 patients, type 1 diabetes patients, the one criticism I've heard is doctors like to have the hemoglobin A1 below 7%, and some people are saying not enough of your patients on your drug met that. What are your comments on that?
Well, the problem we had in that trial is that in type 1 you also have to have a basal insulin,
right,
for handling the glucose levels between meals, and we use what is today the most commonly used and the most effective basal insulin, which is called Glargine or Lantus, and it's an excellent insulin in today's world, but not nearly good enough. What happened is that we recognized the deficiencies of Lantus. If you take the insulin, that insulin before you go to bed, in order to get a fasting level in the morning, what happens during the day is that the baseline starts to rise, and that adds to our results close to 0.5% of an A1C. If we had gotten that extra 0.5%, most of our patients would have been under 7%. But what happened is that because the label for Lantus does not call for 2 injections a day, which is what we wanted to do, the FDA wouldn't let us do that. So we could only do the 1 at night, and that led to this other issue.
Now, one thing, one aspect, on a positive aspect, you'd like to say that inhaled Afrezza is safer. There's fewer cases of hypoglycemia.
Yes.
And did you, Dr. Schuyler, we interviewed him, and he said in many trials he's done that it could be one patient that has multiple hypoglycemia skewing the whole data.
Yes.
Did you see that? Was there 1 or 2 patients
there was one patient that had almost half of all of the hypoglycemic incidents, and I'm trying to find out why that was. We're doing an investigation of that patient.
All right. And so let's assume Afrezza is approved tomorrow. What type of patient would you market this to, try to get it used on first? Type 2, type 1? What do you see your strategy for launching Afrezza? What's the low-hanging fruit, the patient that needs it the most?
Well, I personally think that it should be marketed to the entire spectrum of diabetes. It will probably be used first for type 1s and late type 2s, but in the end I believe that it should very quickly be adopted by fairly early stage type 2s, because really the correct anti-glycemic is really a proper prandial insulin, and that's really what Afrezza does. It provides a great prandial insulin, and in type 2, all these other drugs that people are using are really excuses for the fact that there isn't a good prandial insulin.
Okay. Let's talk some finances, please. We have the CFO here. Just a little piece of minutia. A lot of questions has come up. What, right now at this date of October 17th, what is the number of shares outstanding right now, and what should people be, if they're using a net present value estimation or whatever their financial models? What's the what are the current shares? Is it 350 million or?
Well, interestingly, that's a harder question to answer since you were so precise in how you asked the question. Many will remember about a year ago we did a financing, and we gave out some warrants in connection with that financing. They were 1-year warrants. Those are coming due very shortly now. So we're getting a very dramatic amount of exercises. In fact, I think 14 million came in just yesterday from exercises of the warrants. So it's changing very rapidly.
So if all of those are exercised right now, that leaves...
If you figure all those in, and I typically do, because those are reasonably certain to come in, you should assume about 350 million shares.
And that nothing after that?
And that includes mine too, because I have some, I provided some financing, and I have some warrants also to be exercised.
And the overall cash situation now, you're burning cash, right? You're not making revenue, and that is coming from Deerfield and also your personal accounts. Explain the cash flow, the source of cash.
Okay, so we're about as flush with cash today as we have been in any recent memory, which is a good thing. The last reported cash balance we had was 28.5 million, but that was way back at the end of June. The very next day we announced the Deerfield deal. Brought in the first 40 million tranche of that deal. We've since brought in a second tranche of 40 million, and we'll bring in a third in December. That coupled with the money coming in from these warrants, all told it's going to be about $90 million, gives us a pretty healthy cash position at the moment.
All right, and that should last you for more than a year or so, and the FDA event.
It would, but for we have a large debt instrument coming due in December, and that's why we timed the third tranche of the Deerfield transaction to come in then.
All right.
So to the extent we choose to pay that back in cash, we expect we probably will, we'll have the cash to do it.
All right. Well, let's change gears now to the second sight company of yours. A week or two ago, you got the first, what everyone's calling the bionic eye approved. And you informed me just now, I didn't realize this, that Medicare has approved reimbursement. Yes. That's a big issue. So let's start. What is the bionic eye? Can you explain? It's basically a camera that bypasses a malfunctioned retina and then is surgically implanted to get the occipital part of the brain, correct?
No, the current device, you wear a pair of glasses, and there's a little camera on that, and it sends a signal to a behind the ear device, which processes the picture and then sends it to a transmitter that transmits it to to something inside the eye against the retina, which creates a rather crude television picture by stimulating the retina.
So the camera and basically the small computer are external, but then it's transmitted through the skin, a seamless barrier, correct? There's no wire going through the skin for infection. No. And then ultimately there's something that requires neurosurgery to implant a chip onto the cortex of the brain.
No.
Or no?
No. Later we will do, for other forms of blindness, we will do something where we stimulate the brain directly, but now we only stimulate the retina.
Oh, okay, that's important. I misunderstood. All right. So this is approved, and it's only for the indication of retinitis pigmentosa now? Or?
That's the current approval, yes.
And why couldn't any disease, macular degeneration, or anything where the retina is damaged potentially benefit from this?
We're going to start a trial shortly with AMD.
Okay. Now, we've seen with tremendous products like deep brain stimulation that can do wonders for Parkinson's, but the problem is it's not being widely used because, for a variety of reasons, it takes a long time in the operating room, and there's also not enough reimbursement. So discuss the reimbursement. Are you pleased with it? Will it cover the cost for hospitals?
We're especially pleased. It was really quite a surprise. We had gotten approval from the FDA earlier this year, and then we requested approval for Medicare from the CMS, which does Medicare reimbursement, and we requested a meeting which was supposed to be held actually this month, we thought, and then about 6 weeks or so ago, all of a sudden we got a letter giving us full approval.
That's interesting. Now, it's currently a privately held company. Do you need to go public? What's the status with the company? Do you see it eventually doing an IPO or partnering with a larger medical device company?
Well, our original plan was actually not to market this ourselves, but to partner with a strategic organization that in the ophthalmic area. But unfortunately, all of the major ophthalmic companies have been acquired in the last couple of years, and they're all undergoing stages of reorganization, so it's really not a very good time.
So Bausch & Lomb, AMO was bought by Abbott.
Yeah, Fovea and Alcon, they're all been acquired. So at this point, we're trying to decide what to do, and we are talking about an IPO, but we're also talking about maybe doing it a year from now, maybe setting up our own sales and marketing organization.
When do you expect to be in the clinics now that it's approved and you have reimbursement?
Well, we're doing it now, but only in small numbers right now.
Okay. Well, very interesting. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.